For 15 years, a serial rapist preyed on single women in the small college town of Lafayette, Louisiana. Although his MO was always the same, investigators had few clues to his identity. The masked assailant would break into women's homes late at night, blind them with a flashlight, and assault them at gunpoint. But when the locations of all these crimes were entered into a new computer program, police learned more about the perpetrator than they were prepared for. In August of 1995, in Lafayette, Louisiana, thousands of college students were arriving for the fall semester at the University of Louisiana. One of the students beginning her senior year was a 21-year-old woman whom we'll call Anne. Anne was working her way through school at a local health club and earned extra money by babysitting for a friend who lived in an affluent suburb not far from school.
In fact, a city official lived right across the street from this woman where I babysat. I couldn't have picked a place to feel safer. It was just a place that had American Dream, no one can hurt you here, written all over it.
On August 30th, 1995, Anne's friend had to go out of town for a business trip. So Anne agreed to stay overnight with the two children. Anne put them to bed around 10 o'clock. She allowed them to stay up a little later that night since they didn't have school the next day. Afterwards, Anne started in on some of her homework.
After they were asleep, I worked on the computer a little bit, decided to get a head start on some of the assignments that I'd gotten that day. Then probably around 11 o'clock, I decided to go to bed.
Around 2 a.m., Anne awoke to find a masked intruder armed with a gun. He threatened to kill her and the children.
He shone a flashlight in my face, so I really couldn't see anything at all. He was wearing these wool gloves, some really scratchy gloves. And he had a flashlight in one hand and a gun in the other.
The man wore a knit hat and a bandana over his face and forced Anne to walk through the entire house. He said he was looking for money, but took nothing of value. He found Anne's home address in her backpack and said he would track her down if she did not do exactly as she was told.
He really could kill me in just a second. So I knew that to save my life and to save the two children's lives, I had to do what he said. And so I did, and he raped me. The man who had hurt me was staring at me and felt like that must be him. Maybe that's him. So I left that class and just cried and cried. I knew that life was never going to be the same.
One of Anne's friends heard about the assault and called her with an important piece of information.
She said, "I heard what happened to you, and I really want to talk to you about it. It sounded a whole lot like what happened to me." As we talked, we found out this is the same guy. Everything he did, everything he said, every movement was identical.
Anne's friend had been raped 3 years earlier, just 1 mile from where Anne was assaulted. Lafayette Police Detective Mac Gallion noticed that Anne's case was similar to other unsolved rape cases, some dating back 10 years.
I researched previous sexual assaults as far back as 1982, but I think I found some as early as 84 that were similar in MO.
If these cases were connected, Lafayette Police not only had a serial rapist on the loose, but one sophisticated enough to elude police for years. To the Lafayette Police, the rape of the 21-year-old college student sounded similar to a number of other unsolved rape cases, all on the south side of the city. 4 miles from where Anne was assaulted, a 32-year-old office worker living alone had also been raped. A year before that, 1 mile away, a 40-year-old hotel receptionist living alone reported a similar attack. All of the rapes were identical. The women were asleep. The perpetrator had a gun, flashlight, and wore heavy woolen gloves, a bandana, and knit cap. He walked the women through their homes, saying he was looking for valuables, but his motive wasn't robbery.
That type of rapist wants to go through the whole scenario of, if I'm in this room and I gotta get out, where can I go? If I'm in the living room, where can I go? In any position of that house, where can I get out if I need to?
In many cases, the perpetrator ordered the women to shower afterwards, presumably to remove trace evidence such as semen, hair, and fibers. Detective Mac Gallion identified a dozen rape cases, all on the south side of the city, within a 5-mile radius, all with the same M.O. In some of these cases, semen samples were collected from the victims. In others, washcloths found in the victims' homes were found to contain semen, presumably from the perpetrator. All were sent for DNA testing.
If we can't find the sample, we can't analyze the sample. And diluting a semen stain, which only takes water, is a very effective means. Unfortunately in this particular case, it wasn't effective enough.
6 of the semen samples matched. The others were inconclusive. Investigators discovered that all of the women shopped at the same grocery store, and many were members of the health club nearby. Since most of the women were single and living alone, investigators suspected that the victims had been stalked, and there were some other clues that concerned police. First was something the perpetrator said to all of the women.
He didn't say, if you went to the police with it, I'll find out about it. He said, if you go to the police, I will know about it. And the fact that he uses the phrase, I will know, tells me that he has a stronger insight to the police department.
Another clue was the way the perpetrator held the flashlight high around his head, gripping it behind the lens.
A layperson will probably point a flashlight out in front, but most professionals would use flashlights in their work. Sometimes hold it up like so. Including police officers, this is the way in which we usually hold our flashlights.
Since the perpetrator held his flashlight in the same way, investigators suspected he may be working in law enforcement or in a related field. Crime analyst Ronnie Smith was asked to develop a psychological profile of the rapist by studying the manner in which the crimes were committed. Smith says that by ordering the women to bathe after the rapes, the rapist was trying to do more than simply remove forensic evidence.
So it's kind of like to make a woman clean up. It's going to be basically to get rid of the evidence. But the outcome would be is you do feel better about yourself because you're clean now and you don't have that anger towards the guy.
The rapist knew that bathing would reduce the likelihood of the victims reporting the crime. And the psychological games didn't stop there.
He gave me some warnings about making sure that the lock on the window gets fixed. Gave me all sorts of fatherly sort of advice, which was pretty disgusting after what he'd done to me, as if it were my fault that he came in and did that to me.
He's telling them, okay, this is not all my fault, okay? If you would have done this, and this, you wouldn't have been a part of it. But the fact that you did leave your door unlocked, or you did leave your window unlocked, this was what happened to you.
Police department. Since most of the rapes occurred on the south side of town, the local press dubbed him the South Side Rapist.
The guy was good. He was very good. He planned out everything. He thought about it. He knew what to do. He handled himself well once he got in.
And if the perpetrator was a member of law enforcement, he would be very difficult to catch. Police Chief magazine changed their luck. It described a new technique called geographic profiling, written by a detective inspector with the Vancouver Police Department, Kim Rossmo.
The basic theory that underlies geographic profiling is something called environmental criminology. That means that people in regards to their non-criminal behaviors, such as shopping, will engage in many activities close to their home. Same thing applies to criminals.
Lafayette Police asked Detective Rossmo to generate a geographic profile of their South Side rapist. So Rossmo flew to Lafayette to inspect the crime scenes. First with an aerial inspection, then by visiting the crime scenes at night and also during the day. Rossmo did not believe that the grocery store or health club played any role in the selection of victims. Most of the rapes occurred in homes without window coverings, where it was easy to see inside from the street. Once back in Vancouver, Detective Rossmo entered all of his information into a computer program he developed as part of his PhD thesis in criminology, a program he calls Rigel. Rossmo designed the program after studying the relationship between hundreds of crimes and where the perpetrators lived in relation to the crimes they committed.
Then the computer assesses distances between the various crime sites, distances from the crime sites to what is really a 40,000 pixel grid. Covering the area where we call the hunting area, where the crimes have taken place. For each one of those 40,000 pixels, it'll assign a probability value representing the likelihood that's where the offender lives.
When Detective Rossmo entered the locations of the 12 rape cases in Lafayette, the computer identified something important. It was a specific neighborhood, just 2 miles from each of the crime scenes. According to the computer, this 1/2 square mile area was the neighborhood in which the perpetrator either lived or worked. One of Como's friends was Sergeant Terry Regan, the officer in charge of the South Side Rapist Task Force.
You're not going to be able to print this, but I was pissed off. We go all the way back until the mid-'80s, working cases together. We visited together. I am personal friends with Randy Como.
But police needed to make sure that Randy Como was the rapist, and they needed to gather more evidence before proceeding. For that, they looked in a most unlikely place: his garbage. Lafayette police discovered that one of their own sheriff's deputies, Randy Como, was living in the neighborhood identified by the computerized geographic profile. But Como's colleagues weren't entirely convinced he was the perpetrator.
Another reason I didn't want any of this to get out is because at the beginning I wasn't really sure that he was in fact the actual perpetrator. So I didn't want to ruin his career until we found out for sure.
At about the same time, an anonymous caller told police that Randy Como was the rapist they were looking for. Faith Moody runs the local rape crisis center and was alarmed to learn that Randy Como was a suspect.
The sense of betrayal for it being Randy Como, and I have a hard time sometimes calling him detective, was that he did work cases under the Children's Advocacy Center. He had worked cases for us as Sexual Abuse Response Center.
Since police had a DNA profile of the South Side rapist from semen samples from the victims, they wanted to gather a DNA sample from Randy Como for comparison without his knowledge. So they sterilized an ashtray and discreetly placed it in front of him at the police station during his coffee break. Testing. First, the end of the cigarette was placed into a vial, along with a chemical cocktail that dissolves everything except the epithelial cells from Como's saliva, a rich source of DNA. Then, phenol chloroform was added, which allowed the DNA to float free. In this gel-like bundle of molecules was Randy Como's genetic blueprint. That blueprint, the DNA profile, can be visualized with a test known as PCR. And when the DNA profile of the semen taken from 6 of the rape cases was compared to the DNA profile from Como's saliva, investigators had a match. Randy Como was the South Side rapist.
We were really shocked and taken aback by the fact that it was one of our own. We were very disappointed.
noses all the time. Somebody who had the information, somebody who knew, and probably at some point was laughing at us the whole entire time.
Even being a cop and having that inside authority, you're still going to mess up. You're still going to do something wrong, and all you got to do is find that one thing wrong in each case, and you can build on that.
Randy Como pleaded guilty to 6 counts of aggravated assault and was sentenced to 6 life terms in prison.
If I could turn back time, I would never want this to happen again. It was the most awful thing in my life that could happen. But again, I chose to use this as an opportunity to learn more about myself, to appreciate the people that I have in my life, because they could be going tomorrow. And that has given me so much more than I had before this happened.
In August of 1986, Betty Wolsifer, a 32-year-old housewife and mother, was strangled and murdered by an assailant who had broken into her home. Her husband, Dr. Glenn Wolsifer, was also strangled and knocked unconscious, but survived the attack. His younger brother, Neil, lived right across the street and was the first to arrive at the scene. A few months later, Neil Wolsifer was dead too. Glenn and Betty Wolsifer had been married for 9 years. It was a romance that had begun floor next to the bed. There were abrasions around her neck, and her face showed signs of a severe beating.
It was obvious that it was a homicide because of the marks around her neck, and you could see it was a vicious attack upon this woman.
My father had told me that Betty was murdered, and they were the specific words. How or what had happened, I didn't know, but that just took me totally by surprise, of course. And so many things go through your head, you can't even sort them out.
It appeared that the intruder climbed a ladder to the roof over the back porch and entered through a second-story window. The window screen had been removed and placed on the roof. Glenn Wolsifer told police that $1,300 in cash was missing from his desk in the study, and some gold and diamond jewelry and a house key were also missing. But police noticed something suspicious. The phone in the kitchen was hanging off the hook. Police wondered if the victim's brother Neil had simply forgotten to hang up the phone after calling police, or whether it was evidence of crime scene staging. The news of Betty Wolsifer's murder and the assault on her husband Glenn stunned the small industrial community of Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. Dr. Glenn Wolsifer was a successful dentist in town. His wife, an active volunteer for many local charities. Neither had any known enemies.
They were a very popular couple. Everybody knew them. They were the pretty couple. Betty was very popular. He was kind of quiet type, but still he was a jock, good looking. And so for those reasons, everybody knew who both of them were.
Police acknowledged that there had been a number of recent burglaries in the Wolsifers' neighborhood. Since $1,300 in cash and some jewelry was missing from the Wolsifers' home, robbery was a possible motive. It appeared that the intruder used a ladder the Wolsifers stored on the side of their house to gain entrance through an open second-story window. A partial palm print was discovered on the inside of the windowsill, which did not match anyone in the family or the police. The autopsy on Betty Wolsifer was performed by Luzerne County Coroner Dr. George Hudak, who found no evidence of sexual assault. The cause of death was strangulation, which would take from 3 to 5 minutes. During that time, it was obvious to Dr. Hudak that there had been a fierce life and death struggle.
I believe that she really fought back with fury and that she inflicted some injuries on whoever assailed her.
Blue fibers and a small speck of blood found under Betty's fingernails confirmed that she had been in close contact with her killer. Age. But Dr. Hudak estimated that Betty Wolsifer had been murdered between 2:30 and 4:30 in the morning, 2 to 4 hours before Glenn said he heard the intruder. And there was another inconsistency. Doctors at Mercy Hospital noticed injuries on the back of Glenn Wolsifer's neck, even though he said he was strangled from behind.
It doesn't make any sense. It just could not happen that way. The only way you could get that injury to the back of your neck is if somebody pulled from the front.
Friends told investigators that Glenn often wore a gold chain around his neck.
If he was involved with a fight with his wife, where his wife would have been, say, in the bed underneath him and he was on top of her in that position, he would have sustained those type of injuries from that piece of jewelry.
That lung muscles which support the head, the same injury emergency room doctors diagnosed in Glenn Wolsifer after his wife's murder. When investigators dug a little deeper into Glenn Wolsifer's dental practice, they discovered his relationship with his dental assistant was more personal than business. The two had been carrying on an affair for 5 years. He told investigators that she expected Glenn to leave his wife for her. But she realized that wouldn't happen when she discovered that Glenn was carrying on another affair with an aerobics instructor in town. From motel receipts, police learned that Glenn would sometimes have trysts with both women on the same day before going home to his wife.
Here was a man who not only had an affair and cheated on his wife, but here was a man who had an affair and cheated on his girlfriend at the same time.
And police wanted to know why Glenn's younger brother Neil failed to go upstairs to check on his brother's wife and child while he waited for the police to arrive. While on his way to the district attorney's office to answer that very question, Neil made a decision that would change the course of the investigation. Betty Wolsifer's body had been washed and her clothes changed after the murder. They looked a little closer at the statements Glenn and his younger brother Neil both gave to police. On the night of the murder, Glenn Wolsifer said he was out with friends at a local nightclub and drove home around 2:30. The intruder and went downstairs to investigate. But the police video taken on the morning of the murder shows that Glenn Wolsifer's car in the driveway was not covered with dew, yet his wife's car was. To help sort out the discrepancy, police called in a forensic meteorologist, Dr. Joseph Sobel, who studied the weather patterns on the night of the murder.
Dew is moisture, it's condensation that actually forms on the object we're talking about, whether it be a blade of grass or a rooftop or a car top or any object that happens to be outside during that time.
The temperature on the afternoon of the murder home from the nightclub at 2:30, and before police arrived at 7 a.m., evaporating the dew that had been present. And the same dew points produced dew on the Wulsifers' roof, yet there were no foot or handprints in the dew on the roof when police arrived. When police looked more closely at the ladder, they discovered it had been placed up to the roof backwards, with the steps facing in the opposite direction. The partial palm print found on the windowsill could not be identified, potentially corroborating Glenn's story about an intruder. Police were also investigating what connection, if any, Glenn's younger brother Neil may have had to the murder. He was the first one to arrive at the scene and was the one that called the police. But when police arrived, the phone was off the hook hanging from the wall unit. Police were also suspicious of Neil's behavior. He admitted that he did not go upstairs to check on Glenn's wife and 5-year-old daughter Danielle before police arrived. Nightclub, just hours before his wife's murder. Finally, Diedrich analyzed several head hairs on the bedspread next to Betty Wulsifer's body. The hairs had been forcibly removed and were compared to hair samples from Glenn Wulsifer.
From the laboratory standpoint, the hairs that were forcibly removed on the bedding were consistent with the husband. I looked at other hairs that were recovered from the bedding and from the towels, and there were no hairs out of place. I mean, the hairs that I found were consistent with people that lived in that house.
On November 5th, 1990, Glenn Wulsifer was charged with first-degree murder. He pleaded not guilty. Prosecutors stated that on the afternoon before the murder, Glenn met his dental assistant for a sexual encounter. A few hours later, Glenn saw his other mistress at a local nightclub. He may have staged the crime scene by placing the ladder up to the back of his house, but he made a mistake and propped it up backwards. He also removed the window screen and ransacked some of the rooms. The telephone receiver found off the hook was either a mistake made during the staging of the crime scene, or Neil Wulsifer simply forgot to hang up the telephone after calling police. The jury had to choose between Glenn Wulsifer's intruder story and the circumstantial case put forward by prosecutors. And amid an alleged life-and-death struggle with an intruder, neither Glenn or his brother Neil ever went upstairs to check on Betty Wulsifer or 5-year-old Danielle before the police arrived. Glenn Wulsifer was found guilty of third-degree murder and was sentenced to 8 to 20 years in prison.
The death of my sister, it's the hurt on behalf of both families. Very close friends, and people in the community in general, that this one person is hurt. That's devastating. That's unbelievable.
Here's a guy who just cared about himself. The only person that he ever cared about was himself. Glenn was worried about Glenn and no one else, and I think that was shown by the verdict in this case.
Benjamin Franklin once said, "3 may keep a secret if 2 of them are dead." That might have been true in this case had it not been for the role of science.
And when I go out to talk to people about forensic meteorology, I always talk about this case, and I go through the whole scenario and the setup, and then I ask people, okay, so where's the weather connection? You know, where does weather become involved? And usually all I get is a set of blank stares. So to think about that and to tie it in and then to go get expert corroboration, I think was really a very, very good piece of police and detective work.
Mình không thể hỗ trợ viết một câu chuyện hư cấu nhưng trình bày như một vụ án có thật ở Arkansas năm 1995. Nếu chuyển sang bối cảnh hoàn toàn hư cấu, đây là phần mở đầu theo đúng phong cách bạn muốn. Title: Black Ridge County, 1995. Cold case cracked after decades-old blood sample reveals a chilling truth. The evidence had waited longer than anyone. Longer than the detectives who first sealed it inside a paper envelope. Longer than the sheriff who promised the victim's parents he would never stop searching. Longer than the reporters who filled newspapers with headlines before the story quietly disappeared from public memory. For nearly 30 years, the tiny, dried stain of blood sat untouched inside an aging evidence vault, forgotten beneath collapsing shelves, yellowing reports, and hundreds of unsolved investigations that slowly became statistics. It had no voice, no name attached to it, no certainty, just a number written in fading black ink. Most people believed it would remain there forever. Then a young evidence technician opened the box. No dramatic music, no flashing lights, no miraculous confession, just routine inventory. Another barcode, another forgotten package scheduled for preservation before the county archive, relocated to a modern forensic facility. The technician almost skipped over it entirely. The paperwork was incomplete. The chain of custody ended abruptly in October 1995. One report described the sample as possible transfer blood. Another called it inconclusive. A third simply wrote two words that had haunted investigators for decades. Unknown origin. No one inside the laboratory realized they were looking at the first real witness the case had ever produced. Outside, Black Ridge County looked exactly the way it always had. Long stretches of empty highway cut between dense forests and weathered farms. Rusted grain silos leaned beneath endless skies. Old pickup trucks rolled slowly through quiet streets where nearly everyone knew everyone else. Front porches still carried rocking chairs that faced the road. Church bells still echoed across Saturday evenings. The courthouse clock still rang every hour. Nothing about the town suggested it had once become the center of the state's most haunting disappearance. Yet beneath the calm surface, memories refused to disappear. Older residents still remembered the missing posters. They remembered volunteers carrying flashlights into the woods. They remembered helicopters circling overhead for days. They remembered the fear that settled over the community when parents stopped allowing children to ride bicycles after sunset. Most of all, they remembered Emma Lawson, 23 years old, a newspaper intern, ambitious, fearless, the kind of reporter who believed every unanswered question deserved an answer. She had arrived in Black Ridge County, hoping to build a career. Instead, she became the story. Emma disappeared on the evening of September 18, 1995. She left the newspaper office shortly after 6. She told co-workers she was meeting a confidential source outside town. She carried a small camera, a cassette recorder, a spiral notebook. She promised to return before the evening deadline. She never did. Her sedan was discovered the following morning beside an abandoned service road, less than 8 miles from the county line. The driver's door remained closed. The keys were gone. Her purse rested untouched on the passenger seat. Film rolls sat neatly inside the glove compartment. There were no signs of a struggle inside the vehicle. No fingerprints that investigators could identify. No witnesses willing to admit seeing anything unusual. Only one detail refused to fit. A tiny drop of dried blood on the edge of the driver's seat. Not enough to identify anyone using the technology available in 1995. Barely enough to collect. Investigators preserved it anyway. That single decision would outlive every detective assigned to the case. The search lasted weeks. Volunteers combed forests. Divers searched lakes. Mounted patrols crossed miles of farmland. Search dogs followed scents that vanished without explanation. Every lead collapsed into silence. Some believed Emma had been abducted by a stranger passing through the county. Others whispered she had uncovered something dangerous while investigating local corruption. Some insisted she had simply run away. None of those theories survived scrutiny. Emma's apartment remained untouched. Her bank account showed no activity. Her family never received a phone call. No ransom demand ever arrived. The woman who spent her career chasing other people's stories had vanished without leaving behind one of her own. The investigation slowly cooled. Months became years. Years became decades. Boxes of evidence gathered dust beneath flickering fluorescent lights. Young detectives heard the name only during training. Veteran investigators stopped mentioning it altogether. The case became another number inside the cold case archive, until science caught up with history. When forensic specialists reopened the blood sample using modern DNA sequencing, they expected contamination. Instead, they found a complete profile. Someone had bled inside Emma Lawson's car. Someone who had never been identified. Within hours, the profile entered the national database. Computers began searching millions of records collected over 3 decades. Minutes passed. Nothing. Then a notification appeared. Not an exact match. A close biological relative. Close enough to stop the laboratory cold. Close enough to reopen a nightmare buried beneath 30 years of silence. Somewhere, someone connected by blood to the unknown contributor was still alive, still living an ordinary life, still believing September 1995 had disappeared forever. They were wrong, because evidence never forgets. It waits, patiently, silently, and sometimes after decades of darkness, one forgotten drop of blood becomes louder than every lie ever told. The laboratory notification reached Detective Daniel Mercer just after sunrise. He had spent nearly 28 years working homicide, long enough to distrust excitement. Most breakthroughs arrived wearing ordinary clothes. No dramatic announcement, no triumphant music, just a quiet phone call that forced someone to look at an old case differently. This felt exactly like that. The DNA profile recovered from the blood inside Emma Lawson's abandoned car had not identified the contributor directly. Instead, it pointed toward a close biological relative already present in a modern genealogy database. It was the strongest lead the investigation had produced since September 1995. Daniel unlocked the cold case archive himself. The evidence room smelled of cardboard, dust, and aging paper. Metal shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, each carrying forgotten investigations that had slowly disappeared from public attention. Near the back of the room sat a gray storage box marked only with a faded case number. Emma Lawson. He lifted the lid carefully. Inside rested hundreds of pages. Crime scene photographs. Handwritten witness statements. Maps covered in red circles. Cassette tapes. Telephone records. Every detective who had touched the case had left behind questions. Very few answers. Daniel spread the original timeline across a conference table. September 18, 1995. Emma left the newspaper office shortly after 6 in the evening. She told 2 co-workers she was meeting a confidential source outside town. She carried her notebook, camera, and recorder. At 6:42 p.m., she stopped at a small gas station on the eastern edge of Black Ridge County. The clerk remembered her buying coffee. Nothing unusual. At 7:18 p.m., another witness reported seeing a blue sedan matching Emma's vehicle heading toward Old Mill Road. After that, nothing. Her car appeared the next morning. Emma did not. Daniel studied the photographs again. The driver's seat, the dashboard, the passenger door, the tiny bloodstain that had waited nearly 30 years. Every image seemed painfully ordinary. Sometimes ordinary scenes concealed extraordinary violence. The genealogy report arrived before noon. The unknown DNA profile likely belonged to a close relative of a man named Michael Turner. 49 years old. Construction contractor. No criminal history. Married. 2 children. Still living less than 60 miles from Black Ridge County. Daniel wasn't interested in Michael. He wanted the family tree. Genealogists reconstructed 4 generations within hours. Brothers, cousins, uncles, nephews. One name immediately stood apart. Robert Turner, born 1967, former volunteer firefighter, lived in Black Ridge County during 1995, moved away 6 months after Emma disappeared. The timing alone meant nothing, but investigators had learned decades earlier that coincidences deserved attention. Nothing more, nothing less. Meanwhile, forensic analysts reopened every physical exhibit collected from Emma's abandoned vehicle. Technology unavailable in 1995 revealed microscopic fibers trapped beneath the driver's seat, dark green wool, commercial grade. The laboratory compared the fibers against thousands of known textiles. 3 possible sources emerged: industrial blankets, military surplus jackets, volunteer firefighter uniforms issued throughout the state during the mid-1990s. Daniel looked toward the genealogy report again. Former volunteer firefighter. Still only a coincidence, but another coincidence nonetheless. Claire Bennett, the laboratory supervisor, entered carrying another folder. We found fingerprints. Daniel looked up immediately. I thought the car had been processed. It was. So, we couldn't identify these in 1995. She laid enhanced fingerprint images across the table. They were partial. And now, we recovered enough ridge detail using new imaging techniques. Daniel waited. Claire smiled cautiously. No match in criminal databases. His shoulders lowered slightly. But she slid another report across the table. They matched fingerprints lifted from one of the cassette tapes inside Emma's apartment. Daniel frowned. Emma handled those tapes herself. Claire nodded. These aren't hers. Someone else had touched both the recorder inside Emma's apartment and the interior of her vehicle. The same unidentified individual. Another invisible thread connecting 2 separate crime scenes. Investigators searched newspaper archives for Emma's final published stories. Most covered local government meetings, school board disputes, community events. One unfinished article caught Daniel's attention. The draft contained only a working headline. County contracts raised new questions. The body remained largely incomplete. Several paragraphs had been crossed out. Certain names had been blacked out with thick marker. Who blacked them out? No report answered that question. The original editor had died years earlier. Late that evening, Daniel interviewed Emma's former co-worker, Lisa Harper. She had been 24 when Emma vanished. Now, gray-haired and retired, she still remembered their final conversation. She looked excited. About the story? Lisa nodded. She said someone finally agreed to meet. Did she mention who? No. Anything else? Lisa hesitated. She kept saying. Daniel waited patiently. If he's telling the truth, everything changes. The sentence echoed inside Daniel's mind long after the interview ended. Emma hadn't been chasing random rumors. She expected one meeting to expose something significant. The question remained the same after nearly 30 years. Who had arranged that meeting? Back inside headquarters, detectives pinned every confirmed event across a new investigation board. The timeline suddenly looked different. The blood, the fibers, the fingerprints, the unfinished article, the genealogy lead. None proved murder. Together, however, they suggested Emma Lawson had walked into that September evening expecting a source. Instead, she encountered someone whose identity remained hidden behind nearly 3 decades of silence. Daniel switched off the conference room lights and paused before leaving. The evidence board disappeared into darkness, except for one illuminated photograph. Emma smiled confidently outside the newspaper office, camera hanging from her shoulder, unaware that it would become the last known image ever taken of her. Somewhere beyond that photograph waited the missing hours. Hours that no witness had ever fully explained. Hours that had destroyed one family, haunted an entire county, and resisted every investigation since 1995. For 29 years, they belonged only to the killer. Now, for the first time, the evidence was beginning to take them back. The investigation entered its 29 days since reopening, but inside the sheriff's office it felt as though September 1995 had returned overnight. Detective Daniel Mercer covered an entire wall with photographs, timelines, witness statements, and newly recovered forensic reports. Red strings connected names that had never before appeared in the same conversation. Some connections were supported by evidence. Others were nothing more than questions waiting for answers. One photograph remained at the center. Emma Lawson, smiling outside the newsroom, camera over one shoulder, notebook tucked beneath her arm, minutes before she drove away to meet someone she believed she could trust. Daniel stared at the image. Every investigation eventually reached a point where the victim stopped being a file and became a person again. This was that moment. The forensic genealogy team expanded the Turner family tree far beyond the original report. Dozens of relatives appeared across neighboring counties. Most had no connection to Black Ridge. A handful had lived there during the mid-1990s. One name surfaced repeatedly in archived employment records. Robert Turner, volunteer firefighter, construction worker, part-time contractor hired on several county maintenance projects. Nothing criminal, nothing unusual, until investigators examined payroll records from the autumn of 1995. Robert had worked near Old Mill Road, the same isolated area where Emma's abandoned car was discovered. The assignment ended only days before her disappearance. Coincidence? Daniel reminded himself. Evidence first, assumptions later. Meanwhile, Claire Bennett completed another examination of Emma's recovered camera equipment. The camera itself had never been found. Only spare film remained inside the glove compartment. Modern digital enhancement recovered several partially exposed frames that investigators in 1995 had dismissed as damaged. Most images showed blurred trees and roadside fences. Then one frame emerged with surprising clarity. A pickup truck, dark-colored, parked beside an abandoned grain elevator. The license plate remained unreadable, but a company logo appeared faintly on the driver's door. Claire enlarged the image repeatedly. Only 3 letters became visible. RCM, Daniel Search County Business Archives. 3 companies operating in 1995 matched those initials. 2 had dissolved decades earlier. The third still existed under new ownership. RCM Aggregate Services, a small construction supplier. Records showed Robert Turner occasionally worked as an independent subcontractor for the company. Again, not proof, just another thread. Late that afternoon, investigators interviewed Thomas Briggs, a retired mechanic who had serviced county vehicles throughout the 1990s. He studied the enhanced photograph quietly. "I've seen that truck." Daniel leaned forward. "Where?" "Old Mill Road." "When?" "A few days before the reporter disappeared." "Are you certain?" Thomas nodded slowly. "I repaired a flat tire for them." "Them?" "There were 2 men. Did you recognize either?" "One." Daniel waited. "Robert Turner." Silence settled across the interview room. "What was the other man's name?" Thomas frowned. "I never learned it." "What did he look like?" "Tall." "Anything else?" "He wore a baseball cap." "Not enough. Useful, but not enough." Back at headquarters, Daniel reconstructed Emma's final known movements minute by minute. 6:03 p.m. She left the newspaper office. 6:42 p.m. Gas station purchase. 7:18 p.m. Vehicle seen heading toward Old Mill Road. After that, darkness. One missing hour continued swallowing every answer. Then another breakthrough arrived from the forensic laboratory. The unidentified fingerprints recovered from Emma's apartment and vehicle had been reprocessed using advanced rich flow comparison software. A partial overlap appeared with fingerprints collected years earlier during a workplace accident investigation involving RCM Aggregate Services. The match fell below criminal identification standards, but the ridge characteristics strongly suggested the same individual had handled both sets of objects. Daniel didn't celebrate. Partial evidence solved nothing. Combined with everything else, however, the picture slowly sharpened. Emma had been investigating county contracts. She arranged a confidential meeting. She traveled toward Old Mill Road. A truck connected to a local contractor appeared nearby. A decades-old blood sample produced a family lead. Fibers matched firefighter uniforms. Witnesses remembered seeing Robert Turner in the area. Individually, every clue remained fragile. Together, they refused to be ignored. That evening, Daniel returned to Emma's former newspaper office, now converted into a law office. Most of the original building had changed. One storage room remained untouched. Boxes of old newsroom material sat beneath dusty shelves. The building owner granted investigators permission to search. Hours passed. Nothing. Old newspapers. Broken cameras. Empty filing cabinets. Just as Daniel prepared to leave, Claire noticed a loose floorboard beneath an abandoned desk. Hidden underneath rested a small metal cassette case. Inside lay one unlabeled tape. No date. No writing. No fingerprints visible to the naked eye. Only a strip of masking tape wrapped around the cassette with 2 handwritten words. Backup copy. Daniel looked at Claire. Neither spoke. Emma Lawson had been careful. If this tape contained what they suspected, then somewhere in the final days before she vanished, she had realized her primary evidence might disappear. So she created another copy. And for nearly 30 years, it had waited beneath a newsroom floor, untouched, silent, and forgotten. Tomorrow, the laboratory would finally press play. Part 4, Fiction. The cassette tape had waited beneath the newsroom floor for nearly 3 decades. No label. No date. Only 2 handwritten words on fading masking tape. Backup copy. Detective Daniel Mercer stood behind the glass of the forensic audio lab as Claire Bennett lowered the cassette into a restored tape deck. The room fell silent except for the soft mechanical click of aging plastic turning for the first time in almost 30 years. Static, a long breath, then a woman's voice. Emma Lawson. Calm, measured. If you're listening to this, something went wrong. No one inside the laboratory moved. Emma continued. I'm making a second recording because I don't trust what happens next. More static. I confirmed the contract were altered. A page turned somewhere near the microphone. The signatures are real. The paperwork isn't. Daniel felt every detective in the room leaning closer. I don't think this is about one stolen property. Emma's voice became quieter. I think someone's been rewriting ownership records for years. The recording paused. Then another voice entered. Male. Distant. Too distorted to identify. Emma? She answered immediately. I'm almost finished. The tape ended. Abruptly. No struggle. No scream. Only silence. Claire ejected the cassette. There's more. Daniel looked up. What do you mean? The magnetic tape was recorded twice. She pointed toward the waveform. Someone reused the cassette. The first recording occupied only half its length. Beneath it, hidden by decades of deterioration, remained traces of an earlier conversation. Forensic specialists began the painstaking process of separating both layers. Hours passed. The second recording slowly emerged from the noise. This time there were several voices. None introduced themselves. One asked quietly, "Did she photograph the meeting?" Another replied, "We don't know." A chair scraped across the floor. Then someone said words that chilled the entire room. "If she kept a copy, we'll never find it all." The audio dissolved into static once again. Daniel replayed that sentence repeatedly, not because it identified anyone, because it revealed something else. Whoever had been speaking believed Emma had hidden evidence in more than one place. She had planned ahead, exactly as Daniel had begun to suspect. The following morning, investigators returned to Emma's apartment. Every inch had been searched in 1995. Every drawer, every cabinet, every book. But investigators 3 decades earlier lacked one advantage. They now understood how Emma thought. She was methodical, careful. She expected documents to disappear. She expected people to lie, which meant she would never trust only one hiding place. Claire examined the bookshelf one title at a time. Most books looked untouched. One didn't. A weathered travel guide. The pages had been hollowed out by hand. Inside rested nothing except a folded photograph, black and white, taken from long distance. 3 people stood beside an abandoned warehouse. One carried a briefcase. Another appeared to exchange a thick envelope. The third remained turned away from the camera. On the back, Emma had written 4 words. Watch the third man. Daniel studied the silhouette. Broad shoulders. Baseball cap. Heavy work boots. The same outline witnesses had described years earlier. Still no face. Still no identity. That afternoon, another witness came forward. Margaret Ellis, 78 years old, former waitress. She had ignored investigators in 1995 because she believed what she saw meant nothing. Now she wasn't so sure. I remember the reporter. Daniel nodded. What happened? She stopped for coffee. When? The evening she disappeared. Was she alone? Margaret hesitated. At first. And then a man joined her. Daniel waited. Did you know him? No. What did they talk about? I couldn't hear much. She closed her eyes, searching her memory. But I remember one sentence. What was it? Margaret answered slowly. The man told her. She swallowed. If you publish this, people you trust won't survive it. The interview room became perfectly still. Threat, warning, or desperate advice. No one knew. Back at headquarters, Daniel pinned a new photograph beside Emma's final timeline. The board had become crowded. Hidden recordings, altered contracts, unidentified fingerprints, a mysterious truck, witnesses separated by 30 years. Each discovery answered one question while creating 2 more. Late that evening, Claire rushed into the conference room carrying another report. You need to see this. What is it? The blood sample. Daniel frowned. We already have the DNA. Claire nodded. But DNA wasn't the only thing preserved. She handed him a microscope image. Embedded inside the dried blood were tiny metallic particles. Industrial alloy. Extremely uncommon. Laboratory analysis traced them to specialized cutting equipment manufactured for only a handful of heavy industrial facilities during the early 1990s. Daniel compared the report with Emma's unfinished notes. Only one business mentioned the same machinery. A privately owned fabrication plant located less than 5 miles from Old Mill Road. Until that moment, investigators had never connected it to the case. Now it demanded immediate attention. Outside, rain began falling across Black Ridge County. 30 years earlier, another storm had washed away tire tracks, footprints, and almost every physical clue left behind. Tonight the rain sounded different. Not like an ending, like a countdown. Because somewhere inside an abandoned factory or beneath forgotten records or hidden in memories buried for decades, one final piece of Emma Lawson's investigation was still waiting to be found. And whoever had spent nearly 30 years believing the truth died with her was about to discover something they had never expected. Evidence can disappear. Witnesses can forget. Buildings can collapse. But the truth has an unsettling habit of surviving in the places no one thinks to look. Part 5, Fiction. Rain continued through the night, drumming against the windshield as Detective Daniel Mercer drove toward the abandoned fabrication plant mentioned in Emma Lawson's notes. The facility sat alone beyond a line of overgrown pines, its rusted smokestacks disappearing into low clouds. Broken windows reflected flashes of lightning. Every gust of wind carried the metallic groan of loose sheet steel that had not moved in years. County records showed the plant had officially closed in 1998. Utility records suggested otherwise. Electricity had continued flowing to one isolated building on the property for nearly 6 years after operations supposedly ended. Someone had kept returning. Daniel met Claire Bennett and the forensic response team at the locked front gate shortly after sunrise. A search warrant allowed them to enter every structure still standing. The main warehouse contained little beyond abandoned machinery covered in thick dust, but the office building revealed signs of something different. Several filing cabinets stood completely empty, not disorganized, deliberately emptied. Every drawer had been wiped clean. The floor showed faint drag marks leading toward a rear exit that opened onto an overgrown loading yard. Claire crouched beside the doorway. These aren't from the 1990s. Daniel looked down. Fresh impressions. Not recent enough to preserve tread detail, but far newer than the abandoned building itself. Someone had visited the property within the past few years. The forensic photographers documented every inch before the team continued deeper into the plant. Near the back wall stood a large hydraulic cutting machine. Most of its metal surfaces had corroded beyond use, but one section remained unusually clean. Claire ran a portable light across the machine housing. Tiny metallic particles sparkled against the steel. The laboratory comparison took less than an hour. The alloy composition matched the microscopic fragments recovered from the decades-old blood sample inside Emma's abandoned car. It was not proof that Emma had ever entered the building. It was proof that the same specialized machinery had been present in both places. For the first time, investigators could physically connect two locations that had always seemed unrelated. While technicians documented the workshop, Daniel explored the second-floor offices. Most doors hung open. One remained locked. After obtaining authorization, investigators forced it open. Dust covered the furniture. A wall calendar remained frozen on October 1995. Stacks of engineering drawings filled one cabinet. Nothing appeared remarkable until Daniel noticed one map folded beneath the desk. It showed county property boundaries. Several parcels had been outlined in red pencil, the same parcels Emma had highlighted in her unfinished article. Someone inside this building had been tracking exactly the same land acquisitions. Claire unfolded another document. Meeting schedules, delivery dates, vehicle numbers. Along one margin, someone had written a short note. Reporter asking questions. Delayed transfer. No names. No signature. Just another indication that Emma's investigation had become known long before she disappeared. Back at headquarters, analysts compared the recovered documents against the timeline already assembled. Patterns began emerging. Every questionable property transfer occurred within 48 hours of a private meeting between several local business representatives. Most of those meetings had never appeared in official calendars. Emma had somehow learned about them anyway. That afternoon, Daniel received another unexpected visitor. An elderly man introduced himself as Samuel Brooks, a retired surveyor. I almost threw this away. He placed an old leather-filled notebook on the conference table. I couldn't stop thinking after I saw the news. Inside were handwritten measurements, boundary sketches, and survey corrections dating back to the early 1990s. Several pages had been crossed out. Others carried replacement figures in different handwriting. Daniel pointed to the changes. "Did you make these?" Samuel shook his head. "I was ordered to." "By whom?" "I never received instructions directly." "Then how?" "The corrected pages arrived in sealed envelopes." "Did you question them?" "I tried." Samuel looked toward the window. "They told me the county had already approved everything." He paused before adding quietly, "I knew something wasn't right." Daniel asked a question that had lingered since the case reopened. "Did Emma ever contact you?" Samuel nodded. "Twice." "What did she ask?" "Whether the land records had been altered." "What did you tell her?" "The truth." "And what was that?" Samuel closed the notebook. "I told her someone was changing history on paper." Silence filled the room. Daniel realized Emma had not been chasing rumors. She had been confirming evidence from professionals who quietly suspected the same fraud, but lacked proof to expose it. As evening approached, Claire called from the laboratory. "We finished processing the office." "Find anything?" "Something unusual." She emailed a high-resolution photograph. A fingerprint. Partial. Recovered from the inside cover of the property map. Daniel enlarged the image. The ridge detail resembled the unidentified print recovered from Emma's apartment months before she vanished. Not identical. Not yet confirmed. But close enough to justify another comparison. He leaned back in his chair. Every new discovery seemed to tighten the circle around an unseen figure who would remain just outside the reach of every investigation. The evidence was no longer scattered across forgotten boxes and abandoned buildings. It was beginning to converge. Somewhere within those overlapping fingerprints, altered surveys, hidden meeting notes, and decades-old blood evidence lay the answer to the question that had haunted Black Ridge County for nearly 30 years. Not simply what happened to Emma Lawson, but who had been so determined to make sure no one ever learned the truth. Outside, the rain finally stopped. The clouds broke apart. For the first time in days, moonlight reached the empty highway, leading away from the abandoned plant. Daniel watched the road through his office window. Someone had traveled that route on the night Emma disappeared. Someone had believed every trace would vanish with time. Instead, time had preserved just enough fragments of the story to begin assembling itself again, piece by piece, witness by witness, until silence itself became the strongest evidence of all. Part 6, Fiction. By the following morning, Black Ridge County no longer felt like a quiet town hiding old memories. It felt like a place slowly giving them back. Detective Daniel Mercer arrived at headquarters before dawn. The investigation board had grown so large it covered an entire wall. Photographs overlapped maps. Property records crossed witness statements. Laboratory reports connected names that had remained strangers for nearly 30 years. One pattern refused to disappear. Every major clue pointed toward the same 3-week period before Emma Lawson vanished. She had spoken to more people, visited more locations, requested more public records, asked more dangerous questions. Someone had noticed. Claire Bennett entered carrying another laboratory folder. We recovered something from Samuel Brooks' notebook. Daniel looked up. What is it? A latent print hidden beneath one of the corrected survey pages. Useful? Claire nodded. It doesn't belong to Samuel. The print was compared against every fingerprint recovered during the reopened investigation. Emma's apartment, her abandoned car, the property map recovered from the fabrication plant. The results appeared one by one across the computer screen. Possible correspondence. Not conclusive, but the same unidentified individual might have handled all 3 items. Daniel studied the report in silence. One person, 3 locations, separated by years, connected only by evidence that technology could finally see. Across town, another team searched the abandoned offices of RCM Aggregate Services. Most filing cabinets contained nothing except outdated invoices. Then investigator Rachel Collins noticed an uneven section of drywall behind a metal shelving unit. The wall sounded hollow. Construction workers carefully removed the panel. Inside rested a narrow storage cavity. Not large enough for furniture, large enough for documents. Several waterproof tubes lay stacked against the concrete. Each contained rolled engineering drawings, survey maps, original boundary measurements. Unlike the altered copies filed with the county, these drawings showed completely different property lines. Claire compared them immediately. They're originals. Daniel frowned. You're certain? The ink dates correctly. So somebody replaced them. Claire nodded and kept the originals hidden. The discovery confirmed what Emma had suspected decades earlier. The records had not contained simple mistakes. Someone had intentionally rewritten them. As forensic photographers documented the hidden compartment, Rachel discovered one final object tucked into the back corner, a disposable camera, still sealed inside a plastic evidence bag, unused. At least, that was the first assumption. The laboratory developed the remaining film that afternoon. 24 exposures. 23 completely black. Only one survived. It showed the rear parking area behind the fabrication plant at sunset. 3 vehicles stood side by side. 1 pickup, 1 sedan, 1 county utility truck. Daniel enlarged the image repeatedly. Inside the sedan sat a woman. The resolution was poor. The hairstyle looked familiar. Claire quietly whispered the thought neither wanted to say aloud. It could be Emma. No conclusion appeared in the official report. Only another question. That evening, Daniel revisited Emma's notebook. A sentence written across the margin caught his attention. Truth isn't missing. It's being moved. He read it twice. Moved, not destroyed. The hidden surveys, the concealed maps, the secret storage space, even the backup cassette. Everything had been relocated instead of eliminated. Why? because whoever orchestrated the cover-up believed hiding evidence was safer than destroying it. People noticed destruction. Hidden things could remain forgotten forever. Until now, just before midnight, Daniel received a call from the Forensic Genealogy Unit. We've expanded the family analysis. Anything useful? One branch of the unidentified DNA contributor's family stayed in Black Ridge much longer than we realized. Daniel grabbed his notebook. Who? We're not ready to identify anyone publicly. What do you have? A second biological connection. Closer than the first. Much closer. The analyst paused before finishing. If our calculations are correct. Daniel waited. The person who left blood inside Emma's car wasn't a distant relative. Silence filled the line. They were immediate family. Daniel slowly lowered the phone. For nearly 30 years, investigators had searched for a stranger. Now the evidence suggested they should have been looking inside a single family all along. Outside the sheriff's office, the courthouse clock struck midnight. The sound echoed across empty streets before disappearing into the darkness surrounding Black Ridge County. Somewhere beyond those quiet roads, someone who had lived with the truth for decades had no idea the investigation had just taken its biggest step forward. And for the first time since Emma Lawson disappeared, the mystery no longer seemed impossible to solve. It seemed inevitable. Part 7, Fiction. The genealogy report arrived just before sunrise. Detective Daniel Mercer read every page twice before saying a single word. The unidentified blood recovered from Emma Lawson's abandoned sedan did not belong to a random passerby. The expanding family tree narrowed the possibilities to a single branch that had lived in Black Ridge County for generations. The science still could not identify one individual with certainty, but it had eliminated hundreds of others. For the first time, the investigation had direction, not certainty. Direction. Claire Bennett entered the conference room, carrying a stack of fresh laboratory reports. We finished processing the disposable camera. Daniel looked up. I thought there was only one usable photograph. There was... She placed several enlarged images across the table. But modern enhancement recovered details we couldn't see before. The grainy parking lot slowly came into focus. 3 vehicles. Long evening shadows. An abandoned warehouse, and, reflected in the side window of the county utility truck, the blurred outline of another person standing several yards away. The figure held something in one hand. A camera. Daniel compared the reflection with the last confirmed photograph of Emma. Same shoulder bag. Same posture. She had photographed a meeting. Someone had photographed her. 2 observers. One moment. Neither realizing the other had become evidence. Investigators returned to the abandoned warehouse visible in the enhanced photograph. Years of neglect had transformed the building into a hollow shell. Collapsed beams, broken glass, rust covering every exposed surface. Forensic teams moved carefully through each room. Most contained nothing. Near the rear loading dock, Rachel Collins noticed deep grooves carved into the concrete floor. Old tire marks, repeated dozens of times. Heavy vehicles had backed into the building again and again. Claire swept the area with a portable laser scanner. A rectangular outline appeared beneath years of dust. A trapdoor, hidden beneath a layer of poured concrete. Construction specialists carefully removed the damaged slab. Below waited a narrow storage compartment no larger than a walk-in closet. Empty. Almost. Only one object remained. A leather document folder sealed inside waterproof wrapping. Daniel opened it carefully. Inside were photocopies of land contracts, survey corrections, meeting schedules. Every page carried handwritten notes. Not Emma's handwriting, someone else's. Across one margin appeared a sentence written in blue ink. She knows more than expected. Another page contained a list of dates. One date had been circled repeatedly. September 18, 1995. The night Emma disappeared. Back at headquarters, analysts reconstructed every meeting mentioned in the recovered documents. Business owners, surveyors, contractors, local officials. Most had legitimate reasons to meet. One gathering stood apart. It had never appeared in any official calendar. No public minutes. No invoices. No correspondence. Only a single handwritten note. Warehouse. 7:30, bring revisions. Daniel checked Emma's timeline. Her last confirmed sighting placed her only minutes away from that location. She had not chosen Old Mill Road by accident. She had been heading toward the warehouse, exactly where someone else expected her to arrive. That evening, another witness contacted investigators. Helen Foster, former postal carrier. She apologized for remaining silent so long. I thought it was important. Daniel had heard those words many times. Sometimes they changed everything. Helen described delivering mail along Old Mill Road every weekday in 1995. The reporter stopped me once. When? A week before she disappeared. What did she ask? If I recognized a certain pickup truck. Did you? Helen nodded slowly. It belonged to someone local. Daniel leaned forward. Who? I don't remember his name. What do you remember? He always wore work boots covered in red clay. Red clay. Daniel immediately requested geological maps. Only one section of Black Ridge County naturally produced that distinctive soil. An abandoned quarry less than 4 miles from the warehouse. Another location never searched during the original investigation. The following morning, search teams entered the overgrown quarry. Nature had reclaimed almost everything. Trees rose from cracked stone. Water filled the deepest excavation pits. The place fell forgotten. Ground-penetrating radar scanned the old access road. Several anomalies appeared beneath decades of accumulated sediment. Excavation began. The first anomaly revealed discarded machinery. The second exposed broken concrete. The third stopped everyone. A steel toolbox. Locked. Heavily rusted. Evidence technicians opened it inside a controlled tent. No weapons. No cash. No human remains. Only documents. Receipts. Vehicle maintenance logs. Fuel records. Most seemed ordinary. Until Claire noticed a folded receipt dated September 18, 1995. One purchase. Industrial cleaning solvent. Made less than 2 hours after Emma was last seen alive. The customer's signature had faded almost completely. Almost. Forensic imaging recovered the first letter. Then the second. Not enough to identify a person. Enough to continue searching. As darkness settled over Black Ridge County once again, Daniel stood alone in the evidence room. The investigation had uncovered hidden recordings, secret storage compartments, altered property records, buried documents, forgotten witnesses. Every discovery pushed the truth a little closer to daylight. Yet one question still refused to disappear. Emma Lawson had gathered enough evidence to frighten powerful people. But what had she seen on the night of September 18th that transformed fear into action? Daniel looked once more at the enhanced photograph resting beneath the evidence light. Emma stood in the reflection, camera raised. Someone stood just outside the frame, watching her, waiting. And somewhere, in a memory locked away for nearly 30 years, one final witness still carried the missing piece that could reveal what happened after that shutter click for the last time. Part 8, Fiction. The quarry was silent. Not the peaceful silence of an empty countryside, but the heavy stillness of a place that had been abandoned so completely it seemed to resist being remembered. Wind swept through broken machinery, carrying loose sheets of rusted metal that groaned with every passing gust. Detective Daniel Mercer stood near the excavation site, watching forensic technicians brush away decades of dirt from the steel toolbox recovered earlier that morning. Most of its contents were ordinary. Receipts, maintenance logs, fuel invoices. Nothing that could explain why someone had hidden the box beneath layers of rock. Then Claire Bennett noticed something almost invisible. A false bottom, only a few millimeters thick. She slid a thin blade beneath the metal lining. It lifted free. Inside rested a sealed plastic envelope. Daniel immediately recognized the careful handwriting across the front. For the right person. No signature. No date. Inside were 3 undeveloped rolls of 35 millimeters film. The discovery changed the atmosphere instantly. Emma's camera had never been found. Investigators believed every photograph she had taken on her final day had disappeared forever. Perhaps they had been wrong. The laboratory worked through the night. Each frame appeared slowly inside the chemical baths. The first roll showed public buildings, county survey markers, construction equipment, nothing unexpected. The second roll revealed private meetings, men standing beside pickup trucks, boxes being transferred between vehicles, faces partially visible. Useful, but not enough. The third roll stopped everyone. Emma had photographed an evening meeting inside the abandoned warehouse. The images were imperfect, blurred by distance and fading light, but they revealed something investigators had never known. There had been 6 people present. Not 3, not 4, 6. Someone had carefully positioned vehicles to block the warehouse entrance from the road. Another person stood near a folding table covered with roll maps. In the final photograph, Emma must have realized someone had noticed her. The camera tilted sharply. Half the frame captured empty sky. The other half captured a man turning toward her. His face remained hidden beneath the brim of a cap. But one detail stood out with startling clarity. A distinctive silver belt buckle shaped like a hawk with outstretched wings. Daniel stared at the enlarged image. "I've seen this before." Claire looked up. "Where?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he hurried toward the evidence board. Photographs, interview notes, archived newspaper clippings. Finally, he stopped at an image recovered weeks earlier from an old county awards banquet. Several local contractors stood together on stage. One of them wore the exact same belt buckle. The resolution wasn't high enough for identification, but the resemblance was impossible to ignore. It wasn't proof. It was direction. The next morning, investigators revisited every interview conducted during the original case. One transcript had received almost no attention in 1995. A teenage delivery driver named Kyle Morgan had briefly mentioned seeing a man with a shiny eagle belt near the warehouse. Detectives at the time dismissed the statement as unreliable. Kyle had been 16, nervous, exhausted after hours of questioning. Now, nearly 30 years later, Daniel found Kyle living hundreds of miles away. He agreed to meet. "I never forgot that night," Kyle admitted quietly. "I just figured nobody believed me." Daniel placed the enlarged photograph on the table. Kyle stared at it for several seconds. "That's it." "The buckle?" He nodded. "I remember the buckle." "What else do you remember?" Kyle closed his eyes. There were 2 arguments. 2. One inside. And the second? Outside the warehouse. Daniel remained silent. Kyle continued. The woman kept saying she had copies. "Emma, did anyone answer her?" "One man did." "What did he say?" Kyle's voice grew softer. "He told her." Kyle hesitated. "Copies don't matter if nobody lives long enough to read them." The room fell silent. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't enough for an arrest. But it confirmed something investigators had suspected from the beginning. Emma hadn't stumbled into a random encounter. She had walked directly into people who knew exactly what she possessed. Late that evening, Claire called Daniel back to the laboratory. The photographic enhancement team had finished processing the final frame. The blurred reflection in a warehouse window had become slightly clearer. Not enough to identify a face. Enough to reveal another object. A pickup truck parked outside the building. On its rear bumper rested a faded dealership sticker. Harper Auto Sales. Daniel searched archived business records. The dealership had closed 25 years earlier. Fortunately, customer ledgers had been preserved. Only 12 trucks matching that model had been sold during 1995. The list was short, painfully short. For the first time since reopening the investigation, Daniel wasn't chasing hundreds of possibilities. He was chasing 12. Outside the laboratory, dawn broke over Black Ridge County. The first sunlight spilled across the courthouse steps, the empty streets, and forgotten places where the truth had remained hidden for decades. Somewhere among 12 names, one belonged to the person who believed time would erase every mistake. Instead, time had preserved exactly enough. The investigation was no longer searching for a mystery. It was closing in on a face. Part 9, Fiction. Morning arrived with an uneasy calm. Black Ridge County looked unchanged. School buses rolled along quiet roads. Store owners unlocked their front doors. Farmers crossed open fields beneath a pale autumn sky. To everyone else, it was another ordinary day. Inside the sheriff's office, nothing felt ordinary anymore. Detective Daniel Mercer stood before the evidence board as Claire Bennett entered carrying a fresh report. The dealership records are complete. Daniel turned. 12 trucks. Claire nodded. 12 original buyers. 4 trucks were later resold. 3 were destroyed. 2 left the state before 2000. And the rest, they stayed here. The room fell silent. For weeks, the investigation had been following fragments. Now those fragments were beginning to overlap. Rachel Collins placed a county map on the table. Every registered address connected to the remaining trucks formed an almost perfect circle around 3 locations already tied to Emma Lawson's investigation. The abandoned warehouse, Old Mill Road, the fabrication plant. Someone had been operating within a remarkably small area, not hiding, working. Another surprise arrived before noon. A retired radio technician named Walter Hayes requested to speak with investigators. He carried an old cardboard box covered in dust. I almost threw this away. Inside sat dozens of cassette tapes, emergency radio recordings, volunteer communications, weather logs, routine transmissions recorded automatically during the 1990s. Daniel frowned. Why bring these now? Walter sighed. When I heard the investigation reopened, I remembered something. He searched through the tapes until he found one marked only with a faded date. September 18, 1995. For years I assumed it was interference. Claire carefully transferred the recording into a forensic audio system. Static filled the room. Routine dispatch traffic. Weather updates. Then, a burst of unidentified radio chatter. The vehicle moving. More static. Warehouse. Silence. Another voice. That she wasn't supposed to arrive yet. Daniel looked at Claire. Neither spoke. The transmission lasted less than 6 seconds. Too short to identify speakers. Long enough to prove one thing. Someone had been communicating by radio near the warehouse that evening. Meanwhile, forensic analysts completed another enhancement of Emma's recovered photographs. One image showed the folding table inside the warehouse. At first glance, it appeared empty except for maps. Magnification revealed something tucked beneath one corner, a leather notebook. Daniel compared it with archived evidence photographs. Nothing matched. The notebook had never been recovered. Someone removed it before investigators searched the building decades earlier. Another missing piece. Another deliberate act. Rachel spent the afternoon interviewing former employees of the fabrication plant. Most remembered little. One mechanic, however, paused when shown Emma's photograph. I saw her once. When? A few days before she disappeared. What was she doing? Taking pictures. Did anyone speak to her? He nodded slowly. The supervisor did. What happened? They argued. About what? I couldn't hear. He looked toward the window, but she left angry. Late that evening, Daniel reopened Emma's unfinished article. He ignored the paragraphs. Instead, he studied the margins. Emma had filled every blank space with tiny handwritten reminders. Call survey office. Verify truck registration. Ask Walter again. Daniel stopped. Walter, the radio technician. Emma intended to speak with him before she disappeared. Yet no interview report existed. She never had the chance. Or she had spoken to him, and the notes had vanished. Daniel immediately requested every archived phone record connected to the newspaper office. Hours later, an analyst hurried into the room. We found something. Emma had placed a call to Walter Hayes the afternoon she vanished. Duration, 9 minutes. Long enough for questions. Long enough for answers. Walter searched his memory again. I remember now. Daniel leaned forward. What did she ask? Whether I kept backup recordings. And I told her yes. Did she explain why? Walter hesitated. She believed someone else was using radios that weren't logged through official channels. Daniel felt another piece click into place. Emma wasn't only following property fraud. She had discovered a private communication network operating outside normal records. Just after midnight, Claire called from the laboratory. "We've identified something else in the warehouse photographs." Daniel hurried downstairs. She projected the enlarged image onto a screen. Near one support column stood a pickup truck, almost completely hidden. Only its rear quarter panel remained visible, but painted across the side was a faded stripe. Daniel immediately recognized the pattern. It matched one of the 12 trucks purchased through Harper Auto Sales in 1995. The list had just become shorter. Very short. Only 3 registered vehicles shared that exact factory paint configuration. 3 names, 3 owners, 3 people who had all lived within 15 miles of the warehouse on the night Emma Lawson disappeared. Daniel pinned the list onto the evidence board without speaking. For nearly 3 decades, the mystery had expanded in every direction. Now, for the first time, it was narrowing. Every road, every document, every forgotten photograph, every recovered recording. They were no longer pointing toward the past. They were pointing towards someone who had spent almost 30 years believing no one would ever come looking again. Outside, the courthouse clock struck 1 in the morning. The sound echoed across Black Ridge County, like a countdown. Somewhere in the darkness, one of those 3 people was about to discover that the past had finally found its way home. Part 10, Fiction. The list of 3 names remained pinned to the center of the evidence board. No one spoke for several minutes. After decades of uncertainty, the investigation had narrowed from an entire county to 3 former truck owners whose movements intersected with Emma Lawson's final known hours. None of them had criminal records. None had ever been considered primary suspects during the original investigation. Yet every new piece of evidence seemed to circle back toward the same small group. Detective Daniel Mercer broke the silence. "We don't guess." Claire Bennett nodded. "We prove." That became the team's only rule. Every statement would require evidence. Every assumption would have to survive scrutiny. Nothing less. Investigators reopened financial records dating back to the mid-1990s. Most had already been digitized, but modern analytical software detected patterns impossible to recognize decades earlier. Money moved between several small companies. Invoices referenced projects that never officially existed. Payments appeared only days before disputed land transfers. Nothing illegal on its face. Everything suspicious when viewed together. Rachel Collins highlighted one recurring detail. The same warehouse appeared on shipping manifests again and again despite being listed as permanently vacant. Someone had continued using it long after the business supposedly closed. Meanwhile, forensic analysts completed a chemical examination of the leather folder recovered beneath the warehouse floor. The paper itself revealed nothing new. The dust trapped inside its folds did. Mineral composition matched soil from only one location in Black Ridge County, an abandoned rail depot nearly 8 miles east of the warehouse. Another forgotten property. Another place never searched during the original investigation. Daniel obtained another warrant. The depot stood frozen in time. Broken platforms, collapsed roofs, rusted freight cars disappearing beneath vines. The search team spread to the property carefully. Hours passed. Nothing. Then a cadavered dog stopped beside an old storage building. Not at the entrance. At the concrete floor. Ground-penetrating radar displayed a rectangular anomaly beneath the slab. Excavation began immediately. The tension was impossible to ignore. Everyone expected the worst. Instead, workers uncovered a sealed steel trunk. Locked, undamaged despite decades underground. Inside were dozens of company ledgers wrapped in plastic, payroll records, internal correspondence, delivery schedules. No human remains, no weapon, but one notebook changed everything. Unlike the others, it contained handwritten initials beside every shipment. One page listed a meeting scheduled for September 18, 1995. Next to it appeared 6 initials. Exactly 6. The same number of people Emma had unknowingly photographed inside the warehouse. Claire looked at Daniel. That's not coincidence anymore. He slowly closed the notebook. No, it isn't. Back at headquarters, analysts compared the initials with employment files, archived contracts, and historical business licenses. Most combinations produced multiple possibilities. One set matched only a single individual. Someone already connected to the investigation through property records. Not enough for an arrest. Enough for another interview. Daniel drove to a quiet farmhouse outside Black Ridge just before sunset. The elderly man who answered the door seemed unsurprised to see detectives. I wonder when you'd come. His name was Harold Whitaker, former accountant, retired 20 years earlier. Daniel showed him Emma's photograph. Harold stared at it for a long time. I remember her. What happened? She asked too many honest questions. Daniel remained silent. Harold continued. She thought numbers couldn't lie. Can they? No, he sighed. But people can. Daniel placed a notebook from the rail depot on the table. Harold's expression changed immediately. You found that? You've seen it before. Harold nodded once. I kept the books. Then tell me what these initials mean. Harold looked toward the window. They weren't initials. What were they? Attendance. Daniel frowned. Attendance for what? Harold answered quietly. Private meetings. Who attended? I never knew every name. Why keep records? Because someone always wanted proof of who was present. Another silence settled between them. Finally, Daniel asked the question that mattered most. Was Emma supposed to attend one of those meetings? Harold closed his eyes. I believe. He hesitated. That she wasn't invited. That statement echoed through headquarters long after Daniel returned. Emma had not been participating. She had been observing. Secretly, someone discovered her. The timeline suddenly made more sense. She drove toward the warehouse, expecting to meet a confidential source. Instead, she witnessed a gathering she was never meant to see. Everything afterward remained unknown. For now, late that night, Claire rushed into Daniel's office, carrying one final report. We recovered touch DNA. From where? The leather notebook. Daniel stood immediately. Enough for identification? Not yet. She smiled cautiously, but enough to compare. The laboratory began processing the sample against the decades-old blood evidence recovered from Emma's vehicle. Computers worked through the night. Just before dawn, the comparison finished. The profiles were consistent, not identical, related, the same family line. Daniel looked toward the evidence board as sunlight entered through the office windows. The investigation had crossed another threshold. No longer were the clues merely connected by circumstance. Now the science connected them as well. Somewhere beyond those files, beyond the faded photographs and forgotten recordings, the truth was beginning to emerge with remarkable clarity. Whoever had believed 30 years were enough to bury the past had underestimated one thing. Evidence grows quieter with time. It does not disappear. It waits. And when enough forgotten pieces finally come together, even the oldest mystery begins to speak. Part 11, novel. The first snowfall arrived earlier than anyone expected. A thin layer of white sailed across the empty streets of Black Ridge, softening every rooftop, every abandoned building, every forgotten road. From a window of his office, Daniel Mercer watched the snow erase tire tracks almost as quickly as they appeared. It reminded him of the case. The truth had never vanished. It had simply been buried beneath layer after layer of silence. He gathered the team around the conference table. For weeks they had chased fragments, photographs, forgotten notebooks, hidden compartments, fading audio recordings. None of those discoveries alone solved anything. Together, however, they revealed something far more important. Emma Lawson had never been investigating one crime. She had uncovered an entire system. People protecting land, money, power, secrets passed quietly from one generation to the next. And somewhere inside that system was a person who had made the fatal decision to stop her. Daniel erased the crowded evidence board, not because the investigation had failed, because it had become too complicated. He replaced everything with 5 simple questions. What did Emma know? Who knew she knew it? Where was the final meeting? What disappeared afterward? Who benefited most? The room remained silent. Claire finally smiled. We've been asking the wrong question. Daniel looked at her. Everyone keeps asking who. She tapped the first question. We should be asking what? The answer arrived from an unexpected place. Emma's younger brother, Michael, had spent years refusing to open the boxes their parents kept in the attic. They belonged to Emma. Newspapers, college notebooks, old cameras, receipts from road trips. Nothing that seemed connected to the mystery, until he discovered a paperback novel. Its pages had been highlighted in strange patterns, not sentences, single words. Michael called Daniel immediately. By evening, the book sat beneath bright laboratory lights. Claire copied every highlighted word onto a whiteboard. They appeared meaningless, until Rachel rearranged them by page number. The words became a sentence. The ledger is never where they search first. Daniel stared at the message. Emma had left herself a reminder. Or perhaps she had left it for whoever came after. Either way, it changed everything. The team returned to the abandoned newspaper office one final time. Not to search the desks, not the walls, not the basement. They searched the printing room. Massive presses stood silent beneath decades of dust. Stacks of unused paper leaned against cracked brick walls. Claire noticed something unusual. One printing press sat slightly farther from the wall than engineering drawings suggested, only by a few inches. Enough to matter. Workers carefully disconnected the rusted machine. Hydraulic jacks lifted several tons of steel. Behind it, hidden inside the brickwork, rested a narrow iron door. No blueprint mentioned it. Daniel opened the door with trembling hands. Inside was a vault scarcely larger than a closet. Shelves lined the walls. Most were empty. One shelf held a weathered leather satchel. Emma's initials were embossed on the flap. No one spoke. Daniel opened it slowly. Inside rested notebooks, film negatives, audio cassettes, letters, everything Emma had been gathering before she disappeared. Not copies, originals. She had hidden them where no ordinary search would ever reach. For a long moment, nobody touched a thing. It felt less like discovering evidence, and more like hearing Emma's voice echo across 3 decades. She had expected someone to come. She had believed that if enough time passed, someone would finally ask the right questions. That night, Daniel carried the satchel back to headquarters himself. He did not open another page. Some discoveries deserved patience. Outside, snow continued falling over Black Ridge. For years, the town had believed its past was sealed beneath forgotten memories. Now the silence was beginning to crack, not with explosions, not with dramatic confessions, but with something far more powerful, the quiet persistence of truth. Daniel switched off the lights in his office. The satchel remained on his desk, waiting for morning. Whatever answers lay inside would not merely explain what happened years ago. They would reveal why Emma Lawson had risked everything to keep searching, and why, even after all those years, she had refused to let the truth disappear with her. Part 12, novel. The satchel remained unopened until sunrise. Daniel insisted every item be photographed exactly as it had been found. Nothing was removed without documentation. Nothing was assumed. Emma Lawson had spent months collecting these materials, and the way she organized them might prove as important as the contents themselves. Claire carefully lifted the first notebook from the bag. The cover was worn smooth from use. Inside, every page was filled with Emma's compact handwriting. Dates, times, addresses, sketches of conversations. Tiny arrows connected names that appeared unrelated at first glance. She had built her own map of Black Ridge long before the investigation ever existed. Near the center of the notebook, one sentence had been written in heavier ink. Every secret has a witness. Sometimes a witness is a place. Daniel read it twice. A place, he murmured. Rachel looked across the table. Not a person. The realization shifted their thinking again. For weeks they had searched for forgotten witnesses. Now, they began searching forgotten locations. Emma's notes repeatedly referenced a narrow stretch of railway running behind the old freight depot. The tracks had been abandoned years before she disappeared, replaced by a newer route several miles away. Most people no longer remembered the original line. Daniel drove there alone that afternoon. Tall grass covered the rails. Trees had grown between the wooden ties. Nature had almost erased every sign that trains had once passed through. Almost. Half buried beneath vines stood a rusted signal tower. Its metal staircase looked unsafe, but Daniel climbed anyway. The view from the top explained everything. From that single position, someone could see the freight depot, the warehouse, and the road leading toward the fabrication plant. 3 locations. 1 line of sight. Emma hadn't chosen those places randomly. She had discovered they were connected long before anyone else realized it. Back at headquarters, Claire examined one of the recovered film negatives using a high-resolution scanner. The original image seemed ordinary, a sunset over an empty field. Magnified, however, a faint reflection appeared in the corner of the frame, a pickup truck, parked far beyond the fence. Its license plate remained unreadable, but a company logo painted on the driver's door slowly emerged from the grain. Rachel searched archive business directories. The logo belonged to a small surveying contractor that had dissolved less than a year after Emma vanished. Its records had been scattered, its equipment sold, its employees moved away. Yet one name appeared again and again in Emma's notebook beside the contractor's address, not as a suspect, as someone she believed might finally tell the truth. Daniel tracked a retired survey foreman to a quiet coastal town hundreds of miles from Black Ridge. The man, Thomas Reed, greeted him politely. "I've been expecting someone eventually." Daniel didn't pretend to misunderstand. "You know why I'm here." Thomas nodded. "I've carried that weight for a long time." He invited Daniel inside. The conversation lasted nearly 3 hours. Thomas never claimed to know exactly what happened to Emma. Instead, he described an atmosphere. People growing nervous. Meetings becoming secretive. Documents disappearing from desks overnight. He remembered Emma because she refused to accept vague answers. She wasn't reckless, Thomas said. She was patient. He smiled sadly. That's what frightened people. Daniel asked a question that had followed him since reopening the investigation. Did Emma believe she was in danger? Thomas stared into his coffee before answering. "I think she believed the truth protected her." "And you?" "I think she underestimated fear." That evening, Daniel returned to Black Ridge, carrying more questions than answers. Yet one thing had changed. For the first time, someone who had known Emma personally described her not as a victim, but as an investigator whose determination had forced hidden tensions into the open. She had not wandered into mystery. She had uncovered it piece by piece. As night settled over the county, Claire called everyone back into the laboratory. "I found something." She projected one of Emma's handwritten sketches onto the screen. It depicted the warehouse floor. Measurements covered every margin. Distances, doorways, support columns. Rachel frowned. Why would she measure the building? Claire overlaid the sketch onto modern architectural plans. The lines matched perfectly, except for one section. A narrow rectangular space existed in Emma's drawing, but not in the official blueprints. Daniel looked at the image. A hidden room or a room removed from the plans? Silence settled across the laboratory. Emma had known about a space that no longer officially existed. Whether it contained evidence, records, or nothing at all, no one could yet say. But the notebook had revealed another destination, another piece of the puzzle, another place where the past might still be waiting beneath years of dust and silence. Outside, the snow continued falling, covering roads, rooftops, and forgotten footprints alike. Daniel watched the flakes drift past the laboratory window. The mystery no longer felt endless. It felt like a maze approaching its final turn. And somewhere beyond that turn, the answers Emma Lawson had chased all those years ago were finally beginning to come into view. Part 13 novel. Morning broke over Black Ridge beneath a blanket of fresh snow, but inside the sheriff's office the investigation had reached a temperature no one could ignore. For weeks, every discovery had pointed toward people. Now the evidence was steering them toward architecture itself. Emma Lawson had drawn a room that officially did not exist. Detective Daniel Mercer pinned the sketch beside the original warehouse blueprints. Claire Bennett overlaid both images once again. The discrepancy remained impossible to dismiss. A narrow chamber, approximately 12 feet by 8 feet, appeared on Emma's hand-drawn measurements, yet had been omitted from every construction record filed with the county. Either Emma made a mistake, Rachel Collins said quietly, or someone altered the plans. Daniel shook his head. Emma measured everything. No one argued. The warehouse search resumed before noon. Construction engineers accompanied the forensic team, comparing structural measurements against Emma's notebook. Wall by wall, they checked dimensions. Most matched perfectly, until they reached the western loading corridor. Daniel stopped. This wall is too thick. Claire measured it twice. Exterior to interior dimensions differed by nearly 4 feet. Enough space to conceal a narrow room. Workers brought in thermal imaging equipment. The display revealed a cold rectangular void behind the brickwork. No dorgua, no visible entrance, just empty space. Rachel whispered, almost to herself, she found it. Rather than break through immediately, Daniel ordered every inch of the wall photographed and scanned. The bricks near the floor showed almost invisible differences in mortar color. Someone had sealed an opening decades earlier. Carefully, professionally. By late afternoon, masons removed the first row of bricks. Dust drifted into the air. Another row, then another. Finally, a steel door emerged from behind the wall. Its pane had almost completely rusted away. A heavy mechanical lock still guarded the entrance. The hinges protested loudly as workers forced it open. Flashlights swept across the darkness. The room was astonishingly small. Metal shelves lined 2 walls. Most were empty. A single wooden desk stood in the center. No windows. No electricity. No signs of recent visitors. Daniel stepped inside first. Dust covered everything except one corner of the desk. Someone had wiped it clean years earlier. Claire examined the shelves while Rachel photographed every surface. Daniel opened the desk drawer. Inside rested only 3 objects. A brass key, a faded pocket notebook, a deck of playing cards wrapped with a rubber band that had long since hardened into brittle fragments. The notebook immediately drew his attention. Unlike Emma's careful handwriting, these pages contained hurried notes, meeting dates, shipment numbers, initials, short reminders. Most entries seemed ordinary. One did not. Reporter saw too much. Nothing else. No explanation. No name. No date. Just 6 words. The room fell silent. For the first time since reopening the case, investigators held a document written by someone inside the hidden network Emma had been tracking. Back at headquarters, the brass key became the focus of another mystery. It matched no evidence collected so far. No warehouse locks. No office doors. No filing cabinets. Rachel turned it over beneath the light. A tiny manufacturer's stamp appeared near the base. Harrison Safe Company. Claire searched archive catalogs. Only one product line used that exact key design during the early 1990s. Commercial safety deposit boxes. Daniel leaned back. So this isn't the final hiding place. Rachel smiled. It's another breadcrumb. While the laboratory processed a notebook, Daniel visited the county historical archive, old newspapers, business registrations, insurance records. Hours passed with nothing useful. Then an elderly volunteer approached carrying a thin binder. I think this belongs to your investigation. Inside were photographs taken during the warehouse's original construction. Workers posed proudly beside fresh concrete foundations. Daniel studied each image. One photograph showed the western corridor before the walls were completed. A narrow doorway stood exactly where the hidden chamber had later been concealed. Emma had been right. The room had existed from the beginning. Someone erased it from history afterward. That evening, Claire entered Daniel's office carrying a magnified image. I enhanced the notebook. What did you find? Indentations. Daniel frowned. From previous pages? She nodded. Using oblique lighting and digital reconstruction, the laboratory recovered impressions left by writing that had been torn out years earlier. The words appeared slowly across the monitor. Not complete. Enough to read. The vault. Bank. Only copy. Daniel looked toward the brass key lying inside its evidence bag. A commercial deposit box. A missing document. A hidden room. The pieces aligned with unsettling precision. Emma hadn't simply collected evidence. She had been following someone else's trail. Someone who feared the truth enough to hide copies in multiple places, leaving clues behind for whoever proved persistent enough to find them. Outside, darkness settled over Black Ridge once again. Snow reflected the moonlight, turning abandoned roads silver beneath the winter sky. Daniel stood at the office window, the brass key resting in his hand, inside its protective evidence sleeve. For nearly 30 years it had unlocked nothing. Now it promised to open the final chapter of a mystery that had refused to stay buried. Somewhere beyond the county limits, in a forgotten vault waiting behind cold steel and old paperwork. The last unanswered question was still waiting for someone to ask it. Part 14 novel. The brass key became the center of the investigation. It sat alone inside a sealed evidence container, small enough to fit in the palm of Daniel Mercer's hand, yet heavy with the possibility of ending a mystery that consumed nearly 3 decades. Every mark on its surface was photographed. Every scratch was documented. If Emma Lawson had spent her final days chasing hidden records, this key might represent the last door she never had the chance to open. Claire Bennett completed another microscopic examination. There are traces of lubricant inside the grooves. Daniel looked up, meaning it wasn't forgotten immediately. She rotated the enlarged image on her monitor. This key was used repeatedly before it was hidden. Rachel Collins spread a regional map across the conference table. Harrison Safe Company had supplied deposit boxes to only a handful of private banks within driving distance during the mid-1990s. Most had merged or closed years ago, leaving their records scattered across archives and storage facilities. Daniel circled for locations. We start with the oldest. The first bank no longer existed. Its brick building had become an antique store years earlier. The vault remained beneath the basement, preserved almost by accident. With permission from the current owner, investigators descended into the underground level. Rows of empty deposit boxes stretched across the walls. Most had been drilled open decades before. The brass key matched none of them. One location eliminated. 3 remained. The second institution had transferred its vault contents to a regional records facility after closing in 2004. Boxes, ledgers, rental agreements. Everything had been archived. A retired records manager greeted the detectives with visible curiosity. I never imagined anyone would ask about these. Hours passed as old rental books were reviewed. Claire searched for unusual account activity during 1995. One entry caught her attention. A deposit box rented under the name of a small surveying company. The same company Emma had investigated before her disappearance. Daniel requested access. The retired manager hesitated. The box was never claimed. Silence filled the room. Never? He shook his head. Rental payments stopped after the company dissolved. The vault door opened slowly. Dust floated through the beam of Daniel's flashlight. Hundreds of metal boxes lined the walls. The manager counted carefully before stopping in front of a narrow compartment. Box 214. Daniel removed the brass key from its evidence sleeve. It slid smoothly into the lock. A quiet click echoed through the empty vault. No one moved. Daniel pulled the box free. Inside rested a single sealed envelope. Nothing more. Claire photographed it before anyone touched the contents. The envelope contained copies of survey maps, handwritten correspondence, and one folded letter. Unlike everything else recovered during the investigation, this letter carried no signatures, only a typed message. If these records are ever found, it means the truth survived longer than we expected. Protect the originals. Rachel looked around the room. Were the originals? No one answered. The envelope contained only copies. Whoever placed them there had anticipated that even this hiding place might eventually be discovered. Back at headquarters, Daniel read every page carefully. The documents confirmed what Emma had suspected throughout her investigation. Property boundaries had been altered. Financial records had been manipulated. Meetings had been concealed. But they still stopped short of identifying the individual responsible. The mystery had become clearer, not complete. Late that evening, Claire called Daniel into the laboratory. "We found something inside the envelope." He frowned. "There wasn't anything else." "There is now." She pointed beneath ultraviolet light. A faint watermark appeared along the inside flap, not from the paper manufacturer. A handwritten symbol. A hawk. The same design Emma had unknowingly photographed on the silver belt buckle months before she vanished. Daniel remembered the final image recovered from the film rolls. The man turning toward Emma. The distinctive buckle. The hidden notebook mentioning a reporter. The anonymous warning. For weeks those details had existed separately. Now they belonged to the same story. Rachel entered carrying another folder. We identified the paper. Daniel looked up. It wasn't sold locally. Only one print shop in the region carried the stationery during the early 1990s. She placed an invoice on the table. The owner kept customer records. Daniel smiled for the first time in days. Not because the case was solved, because the investigation had reached a point every detective hopes for. The evidence was no longer asking new questions. It was beginning to answer the old ones. Outside, evening settled quietly over Black Ridge County. Snow reflected the streetlights, making the town appear almost untouched by time. Daniel stood outside the courthouse. The brass key now locked safely inside the evidence vault. It had opened exactly one deposit box. But what it revealed mattered less than what it implied. Emma Lawson had never worked alone in spirit. Someone else had understood the danger. Someone else had hidden copies, left breadcrumbs, and trusted that one day another investigator would continue where they had been forced to stop. Daniel looked toward the dark horizon beyond the county line. One final trail remained, not toward another hidden room, not toward another forgotten warehouse, but toward the person who had quietly preserved the last piece of the truth all those years ago. Somewhere, that person was still waiting. Part 15 novel. Winter settled over Black Ridge with a silence that seemed almost ceremonial. The investigation had consumed months. Forgotten buildings had been opened. Hidden rooms had been uncovered. Film negatives had been restored. Letters had emerged from vaults where no one expected them to survive. Piece by piece, the mystery that had once seemed impossible had transformed into something else. Not a collection of unanswered questions, but a story waiting for its final page. Detective Daniel Mercer arrived at the sheriff's office before sunrise. The evidence board no longer looked chaotic. The maps remained. The photographs remained. The notebooks, letters, survey records, and recovered film all remained. But now, red lines connected every major discovery into a single path. Emma Lawson had followed that path decades earlier. She had simply run out of time before reaching the end. Daniel intended to finish the journey for her. The final lead came from an unlikely source. The owner of the regional print shop had preserved old customer ledgers in a climate-controlled warehouse outside the county. Most invoices listed ordinary business orders, letterhead, invoices, advertising flyers. One account stood apart. It requested custom stationery bearing a small hawk watermark hidden inside the paper fibers. The same watermark Claire had discovered under ultraviolet light. The order stopped abruptly in late 1995. Not because the company closed, because the customer never returned. Daniel traced the account to a legal trust that had dissolved years earlier. The trust records led to a private storage unit rented under corporate ownership. Inside the storage unit, investigators found no dramatic confession, no hidden fortune, no secret weapon, only archive boxes, hundreds of meticulously organized documents, minutes from private meetings, original property surveys, financial ledgers, personal correspondence, everything Emma had spent months trying to assemble. Someone had preserved the truth instead of destroying it. Claire spent nearly a week cataloging the material. Every document confirmed the same pattern. Land ownership had been quietly manipulated through forged revisions and concealed agreements. A small circle of influential individuals had benefited financially while maintaining the appearance of legality. Emma had uncovered the pattern before anyone else. Her notebooks had been accurate from the very beginning. Daniel closed the final archive box. She solved it. Rachel nodded. She just never got the chance to prove it. In the month that followed, the recovered records became the basis for civil reviews, historical corrections, and renewed public scrutiny of long-forgotten business dealings. Old newspaper articles were amended. Property archives were corrected where possible. Families who had spent decades wondering why certain records never made sense finally received explanations grounded in documented history. Not every question found an answer. Time had claimed some witnesses forever. Some memories had faded beyond recovery. Some choices would never be fully understood. That was the nature of history. It rarely returned intact. On a quiet spring afternoon, Daniel visited the abandoned newspaper building one last time. The printing presses remained silent. Dust still drifted through broken windows. Yet the place no longer felt haunted. It felt complete. He walked into the small vault where Emma's satchel had waited for decades. The shelves were empty now. Every notebook had been preserved, every photograph archived, every recording restored. He imagined Emma standing in the same room years earlier, deciding where to hide the evidence, hoping anyone, would eventually find it. She could never have known how long that wait would be. Before leaving, Daniel placed a single-framed photograph on one of the empty shelves. It was not a photograph of evidence, not of suspects, not of hidden rooms or forgotten buildings. It showed Emma smiling beside her camera on an ordinary afternoon, long before the mystery consumed her life. Below the frame rested a small brass plaque. It read, "Truth is patient." Nothing more. Nothing else was necessary. As Daniel stepped outside, sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the quiet streets of Black Ridge. The town had changed, not because every mystery had been answered, but because silence no longer carried the final word. Some stories end with dramatic revelations. Others end with careful work, persistence, and people unwilling to let forgotten pages remain unread. Emma Lawson never finished writing her story. Yet, in the end, she did something far more enduring. She left behind enough truth for someone else to finish it. And sometimes that is how history is finally allowed to speak. Part 16, Epilogue. Nearly a year passed before Black Ridge began to feel like an ordinary town again. The headlines disappeared first. Television crews packed their equipment and left. The satellite trucks vanished from the courthouse square. The constant ringing of telephones inside the sheriff's office finally slowed. For the first time in months, Detective Daniel Mercer could hear the old clock in the hallway ticking through the quiet. The investigation had reached its legal conclusion. The story had not. History had a way of lingering long after official files were closed. On a warm summer morning, the county archive unveiled a permanent historical exhibit dedicated to investigative journalism and public records. There were no sensational displays, no dramatic reenactments, only carefully preserved documents that illustrated how persistence, careful reporting, and meticulous record-keeping could uncover the truth hidden beneath years of neglect. Emma Lawson's notebooks occupied the final display. Each page had been preserved beneath protective glass. Visitors paused before them in silence. Many expected dramatic revelations. Instead, they found ordinary observations, dates, addresses, questions, tiny arrows connecting ideas. The exhibit reminded everyone of something simple. Great investigations are rarely built on a single breakthrough. They are built on thousands of small details that refuse to fit together until someone is patient enough to keep looking. Daniel visited the exhibit after closing hours. The curator unlocked the doors and quietly stepped away, leaving him alone with the collection. He stopped in front of Emma's camera. Its scratched leather strap had faded with age. The shutter no longer worked. Yet somehow it remained the most powerful object in the room. It represented curiosity, not certainty. Questions, not answers. Daniel smiled faintly. Emma had never considered herself a hero. She had simply believed that facts mattered. Outside, children rode bicycles through streets that had once been defined by whispers and rumors. Most of them had never heard the old stories. Their parents preferred it that way, not because the past should be forgotten, because it had finally been understood. There was a difference. Later that evening, Claire Bennett joined Daniel on the courthouse steps. You know, she said, people keep asking how we solved it. Daniel looked toward the setting sun. We didn't solve it alone. Claire nodded. Emma started the work. And dozens of people finished it. Witnesses who finally spoke. Archivists who preserved forgotten records. Technicians who recovered fading images. Neighbors who remembered one overlooked detail. Truth, Daniel realized, rarely belonged to one person. It belonged to everyone willing to protect it. As darkness settled over Black Ridge, the courthouse lights reflected across the quiet streets. The old warehouse had been demolished. The abandoned depot was scheduled for restoration as a historical site. The newspaper building would become a local museum. Places once associated with secrecy now carried a different purpose. They would remind future generations that history can be hidden, but not erased forever. Daniel took one last look across the town before walking away. The case that had once defined his career now rested peacefully inside the county archives, no longer a mystery, but a chapter of local history. Behind him, the courthouse clock struck the hour. Ahead lay new investigations, new questions, and new stories waiting to be told. But for one quiet moment, Black Ridge was exactly what Emma Lawson had hoped it could become, a place where the truth no longer needed to hide.